Hi, my name is Ray Douglas Bradbury. I was born on August 22nd, 1920, in a town called Waukegan, located in Illinois. My parents were Leonard Spalding Bradbury and Esther Marie Bradbury. My father was a telephone lineman and a technician for an electric company, and my mother was a Swedish immigrant, and she took care of me. Well, I also spent time around my Aunt Neva as well. She was a costume maker and really encouraged me to use my imagination, which is probably why, as a child, I grew up watching horror films. I was absolutely fascinated with them. One of my favorites is The Phantom of the Opera. I was also engrossed in the books of L. Frank Bauma and Edgar Rice Burroughs. When the first science fiction magazine came out in 1926 called Amazing Stories, it fueled my love for horror and science further. Not everyone shared that love with me. As a young boy, a friend once ridiculed my collection of science fiction and comic books and heckled me into throwing them all away. A day later, I was so heartbroken, feeling that I had trashed my best friends. I immediately rebuilt my collection. I didn't let this stop me. I remember, in 1932, going to a carnival where the magician, Mr. Electrico, was wreathed in static electricity, touched me on the nose, and said, "Live forever!" The next day, I returned to the carnival to ask Mr. Electrico's advice on a magic trick. After Mr. Electrico introduced me to the other performers in the carnival, he told me that he was a reincarnation of his best friend who died in World War One. I was utterly fascinated with this man. So a few days later, I began to write full time. I have written every single day of my life since that day. My family then moved out of Illinois to Arizona and finally settled in Los Angeles in 1934. I continued to write often and spent my free time when I wasn't writing watching movies and reading in libraries. In high school, I was in the drama club and I had always dreamt to be an actor. In 1937, I joined the Los Angeles Science Fiction League, where I received encouragement from young writers such as Henry Kuttner, Edmund Hamilton, Robert Heinlein, and Leigh Brackett, who met weekly with me. When I graduated high school in 1938, I was going to fight the war like the kids my age were doing. However, I got turned down for military service because of bad eyesight. I mean, I'm not complaining though. Instead, I got to earn a living selling newspapers while I continued to work on my writing. I never went further than high school education. I didn't have the money to go to college, so instead, I went down to my local library to read 3 nights a week. In 10 years' time, I read all the books in the library, and I considered that to be my higher education because I learned from the greats by reading them. By them, I mean Leo Tolstoy and Fyodor Dostoevsky. Even so, I continue to write every day. I have written every day for 50 years. I have kept a steady writing routine. I remember everything I've ever read or seen. I wrote for several hours every day through my life, allowing me to publish more than 30 books, close to 600 short stories, and numerous poems, essays, screenplays, and plays. Through all of this writing, I did meet someone, which is the reason why I could write several hours a day. I married Margaret Maggie McClure, whom I met while she was working as a clerk at a bookstore. My Maggie was the breadwinner in the early days of our marriage, supporting me as I worked on my writing for little to no pay. We had 4 daughters: Susan in 1949, Ramona in 1951, Bettina in 1955, and Alexandra in 1958. Even as I aged well into my 80s, I would dictate for 3 hours at a time to one of my daughters, who would transcribe my words on the page. I have been told that I have an unusual writing style. In my early 20s, I floundered into a word association process in which I simply got out of bed each morning, walked to my desk, and put down any word or series of words that happened along in my head. But my writing is based off the fantastical and unreal. So, doesn't it make sense to have an unusual writing style? In the mid 1940s, my stories started to appear in major magazines such as the American Mercury, Harper's, and McCall's, and I was supposedly unusual in my publishing because I published both in pulp magazines such as Planet Stories and Thrilling Wonder Stories and Slicks, so called because of their high quality paper, such as The New Yorker and Quailiers, without leaving behind the genres that I loved. When I was first getting published and getting actually paid for my writing, many would categorize my writing as science fiction. I don't write science fiction. Science fiction is a depiction of the real. Fantasy is a depiction of the unreal. My love for theater and film started to intertwine and take off in 1956. I advocated for film adaptations of my work. I wrote numerous screenplays and treatments, including a 1956 take on Moby Dick. After the release of Moby Dick, I was in demand as a screenwriter in Hollywood and wrote scripts for Playhouse 90, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and The Twilight Zone. As my career flourished, I became the recipient of many rewards. One of my favorites was being named Ideas Consultant for the United States Pavilion at the 1964 World's Fair. Can't you imagine how excited I was? Because I'm changing lives, and that's the thing. If you can build a good museum, if you can take a good film, if you can build a good World's Fair, if you can build a good mall, you're changing the future. You're influencing people so that they'll get up in the morning and say, hey, it's worthwhile to go to work. That's my function, and it should be the function of every science fiction writer around. To offer hope, to name the problem, and then offer the solution. And I do, all the time. In 1986, I continued my film endeavors and developed my own HBO television series, allowing me to produce adaptations of my short stories. The series ran until 1992. During this time, my writing was on National Public Radio with a segment called Bradbury 13, and it was a 13-episode program based on many of my stories. I was inducted into the Science Fiction and Fantasy Hall of Fame in 1999. Then, life got the best of me when I had a stroke in that year. However, I fully recovered, thankfully, because I wasn't done sharing my work with others. In November 2000, I received a National Book Award for Lifetime Achievement. I received many honors for my work, including an Emmy for my animated adaptation of The Halloween Tree in 1994, and the National Medal of Arts in 2004. In 2007, the Pulitzer Prize Board awarded me a special citation for my distinguished career. I was awarded Commander of the Arts in Letters by French Culture Minister Frédéric Mitterrand in 2007, along with my Pulitzer. I was given a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame at 6644 Hollywood Boulevard. An asteroid was named in my honor, 9766 Bradbury, and the Apollo astronaut named a crater on the moon. Dandelion Crater after my novel, Dandelion Wine. I also have received the World Fantasy Award for Lifetime Achievement and the Grand Master Award from Science Fiction Writers of America. I felt content about my place in the annals of science fiction history, having achieved my childhood ambition of living forever through my work. I don't need to be vindicated, and I don't want attention. I never question, I never ask anyone else's opinion. They don't count. Over the past 5 decades, I have managed to work and produce a tremendous amount of different kinds of work, including short stories, plays, novels, film scripts, poems, children's books, and nonfiction. I am one of the most celebrated authors of the 21st century. I've established myself as having a distinguished, prolific, and deeply influential career as an unmatched author of science fiction and fantasy. Even towards the end of my life, I wanted to help the very thing that made me the writer I am, that gave me a resource to study the greats of writing. So, I helped raise funds for my local library, where now some of my works lay, among my heroes. My work has been translated into 40 languages. I have sold millions of copies around the world, all of them containing new technical and intellectual ideas. My works use their genres to convey and explore existential and political ideas, as well as to expose the darker side of humanity with themes of nostalgia. People say to me, what is Hollywood's responsibility? The responsibility of Hollywood is to prove that we are human, not with happy endings, but with moments we take away and remember.